from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
WESN.
Cause and effect. Actions have consequences. Usually, we say this phrase or this statement implying negative consequences. Usually. But consequences, to some extent, by the strictest sense of the word, are neutral. It's what happens, right? Usually, you use this when trying to teach people about storytelling, script writing, writing a novel. You want to have a cause for your effects that makes the story seem more plausible, acceptable. You follow the logic in the story. But the flip side of that in real life, where you're not able to craft things, basically with a purpose-built outcome, we're not necessarily able to know in advance always what the effect is when something happens, the consequence. Now, with experience, you will tend to learn things, and sometimes we call those actions mistakes. For example, I know that if my hair grows too long, then the effect is, the consequence of that would be, it's a lot difficult to keep it neat. It will in theory take more time, but I am not a man to buy lots of products. Cause and effect. That seems to be something that a lot of decision makers don't fully think through. And if they do think about the consequences, maybe it's the upfront consequences. Now, sometimes they do think it through and they just don't care. And other times, they are thinking about consequences that the rest of us can't see, maybe. And we are left now as an ignorant public trying to piece together understanding, because at the end of the day, to some extent at least, we have to do a job assessment of our public officials, of our prominent individuals, of our community leaders. Because even for an informal spokesperson of the community, at the end of the day, it's a constant evaluation because they represent us in some way or another. Now, even an employee, to some extent, if they are a strong individual, not necessarily overconfident or arrogant, there will be certain limits that if the employer crosses, maybe ethical limits on how the employer treats customers, how the employer treats employees. Well, at that point, strong-willed individuals who have a strong sense of self and strong principles might say, I need a job, but I need to not compromise myself more than this job. Sometimes that happens. And of course, with elected politicians, it's even more obvious. Well, essentially, the majority of the people who voted that person in. And from that moment on, we evaluate. But we also evaluate the opposition in waiting. We also evaluate the people who speak on television, like myself. How good are their opinions? How bad are their opinions? Because at the end of the day, who you support, who you acknowledge, these things matter, and you don't want to end up with less capable people. But it still seems that somehow there's a disconnect, and the consequences of actions are not always, correlated accurately. One of the things that I think is a more interesting consequence, and the angle by which I perceive it, most people might think that is minor compared to the major. There is the Eric Williams Memorial Committee head, Reginald Vidal, is calling on the Public Relations Officer of the UNC to retract his statements. And the headline is more telling, because a headline like this, not everybody's going to read the story, but people will take the headline and run with it. And again, it's not so much what the actual practical, what's going to happen, that I find interesting. I am more along the lines of, what does the public perceive from the communication? And sometimes, again, if not everybody's going to read the article, that makes headlines very critical and potentially very influential. The headline being, PNM must protect legacy of first PM, first Prime Minister. Now, the article does go on to say, I think there's a very subtle one. I think that if the PNM had protected the legacy of Dr. Williams, then there would be no room for anyone like Dr. Mayu to even try to talk about changing the history of TNT. But the headline takes that sentiment, makes it more direct and simple. But even that quote kind of starts you down in this direction, the direction of, well, Dr. Eric Williams is of the PNM. The responsibilities of the PNM, the ownership and possession is the PNM. Ironically, if you want to diminish his importance to the nation, that's the narrative you go with. Because then you say, well, he's PNM, he's not national. And it puts the onus on the PNM. It puts the responsibility on the PNM. But it also puts the status on the PNM. It allows the PNM to claim him more selfishly, in a way, because it's creating a divide now. He is not for the rest of you. He is for us, because you are bad talking him. You are denigrating his legacy. You are questioning his worth. So we will protect him because we appreciate him. You don't appreciate him, so you can't have him. That is basically where I see the logic of this line of statements, of this dialogue. That's the direction it could go in based on the headline, based on the quote. And people will see that, and then PNM people will say, yeah, here's PNM, we need to protect Dr. Eric Williams. And then UNC supporters, well, I'm less capable of making a generalized statement of what they would think. Some of them might be appalled by that because they might not ascribe to whatever it is Dr. Mayu is saying. And they might be upset or annoyed how you could just claim him as yours alone. And then others might say, oh, you can have him, we don't want him, because that's just another PNM. And then that furthers the division of the country, because we don't realize in our zeal to debate an issue which has very little practical relevance in the now, although it can be influential in the long run, but ironically, it's influential in ways that are not physical, it's not substantial. You can't touch it or feel it, right? It's emotional, it's perception. And for the most part, it's more divisive than anything. How it is now, in an attempt to change the narrative because you think this narrative is bad, rather than trying to figure out a way to neutralize, if you think the PNM is trying to use this to their advantage, rather than finding a way to gracefully neutralize that play, you are trying to cut it off, but by cutting it off, you are potentially creating a similar situation, just even far more negative, by doing it this way. Because if the PNM wanted to claim Dr. Eric Williams as if he was their property, as the first prime minister of the country, the rest of the country should have rightfully said, you all can't have him for yourselves. He's all of ours. But that's not what happened in this case. Dr. May, who has doubled down and said, this is my opinion alone. That's nice. I don't see the point of it. So now I think we have reached a point where a lot of the debate is just going to be who wants to win because they want to win, rather than who cares about being right. No one is immune to that phenomenon. But meanwhile, it is somewhat sad that our racial divide is being, the flames of our racial divide is being further stoked by something that at the end of the day was probably just a relatively minor Independence Day message, a controversial one. But again, it's not one that's going to announce new policy. It's not one that's going to figure out how to afford more equipment for the government, more bread for the people. It's not one that's going to figure out how to increase the water supply to ensure that everybody has 24/7 water supply. It's about the hearts and minds of the people, but because it might not have been the best thought out message, the consequences, it has caused a controversy that threatens to further divide us. I will say this though, something like this is not big enough to cause a great division in a society unless there were cracks already there. And in part, the motivation of saying a statement like this can be because those pre-existing cracks. One of the interesting things about race relations is how a lot of people unknowingly think they're doing the right thing and actually fall into the trap of being bigoted in their own way. Think they're righting or wrong, they are balancing out the scales, but in reality, they're not. They're just fanning the flames. They are just tipping the scales in the other direction. And it's not necessarily useful because that just perpetuates the issue. And when we have changes of governments, it's very difficult now to extract yourself from that pattern or the perception that you operate in that pattern. That's why to some extent, it doesn't even really matter if the UNC, if they are racist or not, if you believe they're racist or not, because there are enough people who believe that. So you could try to have a more moderate discussion, more reasonable logic being utilized. You could try looking up statistics and analyzing what people say, but the perception is already there from enough of the public. And the only way to remove something that's a negative perception is to have carefully crafted and purposeful communication. You can't do anything random that you don't know what the outcome is going to be, because things like this will happen. And I come back to the point that I made yesterday. This is so unnecessary. This is so unnecessary because while, yes, things like this can influence a society, and it could have great positive or negative impacts, great positive or negative outcomes. There can be negative consequences if we just kind of leave things alone and assume that it's fine, which is, I guess, part of the impetus of why Dr. Mew decided to speak about it. Note, I don't agree with what he's trying to say. I'm just trying to explain. But at the end of the day, that's intangible, that's difficult to quantify, that's difficult to solve. Meanwhile, we have real practical problems. There's a story in one of the papers this morning. There was a home invasion. The family was not just robbed, but beaten, particularly the 22-year-old son of the family. I think it's a family of 4. The older child was struck in the head with a gun butt, kicked, punched. He had a fractured skull, a hairline rib fracture, swollen lung, partial hearing loss. The younger child, a daughter, was flung against a glass table which shattered. Although they haven't reported what, if any, injuries that might have caused. And then they were threatened with having the house burnt down around them because the home invaders were not liking the amount of cash that was available for them to steal. At the end of the day, they only got about a little under $7,000 between physical cash and money they got from the family's bank cards. They got cell phones, vehicle keys, a gold chain and ring. Doesn't say if they took the vehicle, ironically. But when the family said, this is all the money we have, they said, okay, we will have to light them up. They said they were going to set them on fire, but the lighter wasn't working. They said they didn't mean to do what we do, meaning the criminals, but they have to live too. Consequences. There's going to be interesting consequences that people are not thinking about over this brouhaha going on with Venezuela and the US. And if this might be a consequence generally of the overall efforts that are suppressing certain criminal activities. We have to live too. We have created, I don't know to what extent, how large it is, but we have created a very violent subsection of our society. I say created because one could argue 10 years ago it wasn't quite this violent. And even though the murder rate is going down, at the end of the day, criminals are like other people. Economic forces will affect their behavior, will affect their desperation. It's just that, unlike the rest of us, our desperation might be, do we seek financial aid? Do we beg on the street? Do we go to our family for help? That's our desperation. For criminals, their desperation is be more violent, rob more people. So while part of the country is concerned about things that they can't control, and part of the country is concerned about things that honestly should not be blown up to the extent that it's blown up and should not be debated in the way that it's debated. Here comes a family that, if not for a lighter not working, they may have been burnt alive in their house. Part of the consequences of having this whole Dr. Eric Williams debate right now is the opportunity cost of, well, instead of actually trying to figure out solutions to real problems, we're talking about that. That's part of the consequence. Part of the consequence of governing, of any decision making, is going to be the opportunity cost. What could you have done with the time and resources? And in the case of a national conversation, it's not necessarily so much resources, it's more about time, but we need to understand something. We already, as a people, as a society, as a sentient race, species, we have complex problems when you scale things up. You know, it's one thing if I have a problem and I will try to figure it out and solve it for myself. That is relatively simple because it's one person trying to solve their problem. I might ask for help, but I'm not going to need a million different perspectives to input on something. But when a society has a problem, that's what you get. We have a population of about 1.3 to 1.4 million people, according to our Census Bureau. We're not 1.5 yet. But regardless, say 1,800,000 are adults. That's the amount of different perspectives you're going to have on almost every major national issue. That means that if you want to actually get to practical solutions that are effective and not just watered down compromises that do nothing but except provide lip service to certain things, like procurement legislation, you actually need to have hard discussions in a timely manner to get to a practical consensus as quickly as possible because we don't really have that time to waste. So even one article in the newspaper on something like this bears, I argue, a heavy opportunity cost of what we have lost with regards to available time or space in the national conversation to solve our problems. Already, a lot of people don't know enough about various issues, even when they speak about them, myself included. And part of the national conversation is not just to come to the conclusion, but to help inform the process of making decisions. But then when we have this set of bacchanal or whatever bacchanal because somebody said whatever to Kamala Basabi says in the parliament on a hot mic or whatever, what new junior minister said that he should not have said. But to some extent, the political class, they don't live the lives that you live. They don't live the lives that I live. They live a different life. Maybe the very wealthy people live a similar life. I would argue even they don't live the life. Even the 1% does not live the life that the politicians live. Politicians live in a very different way to the rest of us. A lot of people praise them. A lot of people depend on them. A lot of people serve them. And it makes them forget that they're supposed to really be serving us. So instead of leading the conversations that are difficult and complex, we just get hit with declarations of decisions that at times don't make much sense. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll continue the topic because there's certain aspects that didn't have enough time to get to yesterday. And there is something that was pointed out by a colleague of mine in WSN, an issue with new technology that we have to be cognizant. It can't happen here. Stay tuned. This is talking about a WSN. ASP is not here today. Apologies, but he couldn't make it. This is the unfortunate consequence when you're trying to have dialogue with someone that has a real job outside of the TV show, being a police officer. At times, that comes first. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
A lot of the debate has been about whether or not the Americans should do what they're doing, which is kind of silly to me because it's not like we could just tell them no and they'll go away. What's more important is the debate whether or not our Prime Minister is doing the right thing. And it's, to some extent, arguably speaking, depending on what you're factoring into the equation, the Prime Minister potentially is going maybe a little too far with regards to the level of aggression, with regards to how much she's committing to the bit. The bit in this case is her positive messages with regards to the Trump administration and its actions. Now, I'm not saying that I disagree totally with what the Americans are doing. It's an unprecedented situation, so to some extent, I can't say for sure what all the negative consequences are going to be. But what I can say is the gung-ho attitude of the Prime Minister, I do wonder if for the international community it might be too much. And it might be putting us in a box. It might be too, because you're being so assertive on it, such an absolute position might give us less room to maneuver depending on if certain things change. For instance, I mean, the Prime Minister did say she's here for the Americans going after the cartels, but what if they do start regime change? Is she able to backpedal now? She didn't say that she supports regime change, but will the international community kind of tie her stance to that? Basically saying, well, of course, what do you mean you didn't know? It was obvious, quote unquote, to everybody, right? Now, it all comes back down to what extent should we be neutral in this situation, right? Figgy Ferrer says TNT's position has always been one of neutrality, and we should remain so. But I would argue this. It's two things. One, TNT, we need help to deal with our crime situation because it's supported by transnational crime. And we could do all that we want to try to eliminate crime domestically with our own resources, but the criminals being supported from outside our jurisdiction means our law enforcement agencies could never touch them on their own accord. So they are technically disadvantaged. And then now, to what extent are we going to get proper cooperation from, say, a Venezuelan government? My assumption is that it's not going to be effective. The other thing is this, and a lot of times people say, oh, America's only there for the oil and gas. America only wants the oil. America only wants the oil. Of course, they have people on the coast, they're nervous. I don't think that boat that was hit was anywhere close to us, by the way. But people are nervous because this is Trinidad and Tobago. We're not accustomed to shooting what's happening next to us. Even if next to us is 200 miles away, that's still way too close for our comfort, right? But the thing about America wanting the oil that we don't understand, because our relationship with the price of oil and gas is very different to most countries. We love to see a high oil and gas price. A lot of other countries don't. A lot of citizens of other countries don't. A lot of citizens of other countries have a harder life when the price of oil and gas is high. We're the inverse. I'll never forget the time when Coleman Bill was busy saying oil was $19 a barrel. I don't remember when it had that glitch of being negative, whatever. But I remember he had a press conference, $19 per barrel. Our economy was not looking hot. This is before COVID, by the way. Things were looking bleak. In a way, COVID came at a time when it didn't hurt us as much because we didn't have that far to fall. What we went through then and what we went through when the price of oil and gas would be at its lowest points post-COVID, that's what other nations generally go through when those prices are at their highest point in whatever period you're looking at. So when America goes after the oil, it benefits many of the other nations. It just doesn't benefit us, so it's easy for us to be upset. But it's not just going after the oil in Venezuela. And again, they might do a regime change and then BP might come in and get the contracts. I don't know. But what we do know is ExxonMobil, they have a new deal with the current government of Trinidad and Tobago. That's an American company. Some of the support internally, domestically for this initiative might be because there are interests, American interests, not just with Venezuela, but in this part of the world. But the reverse is true. The Prime Minister has to potentially weigh, not only are we, and we have been cooperating. We've had the assistance of American law enforcement agencies. We don't want to get on their bad side. We want the continued help. Some of it is financial aid. But also there is the American interest of ExxonMobil. We don't want that to just disappear. So I don't know to what extent she has to consider this, but I would imagine it's not zero. We can't just act as though, hey, America, we don't need you. Pack your bags and get out of the country. Well, they haven't even militarily got here yet. We don't want the rest of them to go. But again, does the Prime Minister have to be this aggressive about it? I don't know. The regional diplomacy is very interesting. Of course, the US Secretary of State had an independence message for us. And I think in the past it would have been the ambassador to TNT that would give such a message. But this, to me, and I could be overreading it, is a further indication that the United States administration is looking at this specific area of the Caribbean. Because the crime is here, the smuggling is here. We know the smuggling is here because they had an operation with drugs that reached Portugal, that to some extent there was involvement at this stage geographically TNT's police was involved. Now, but CARICOM has gone on. The General Secretary, Dr. Carla Barnett of CARICOM, has gone on to say the regional groupings relationship with Trinidad and Tobago remains strong. And I think this is an interesting statement to make. You could read this many ways. The Prime Minister said, and I agree with her, CARICOM was fractured long before the Prime Minister said anything about this situation. And ironically, why would CARICOM potentially be fractured by the Prime Minister supporting America dealing with Venezuela? Venezuela is not part of CARICOM. Well, certain members have various economic relationships with Venezuela and therefore diplomatic relationships with Venezuela. And those relationships were expressed with very strong and to some extent premature language. A brutal attack requires an attack to happen. But they called out America for a brutal attack while America was in transit. I don't know how my ships transiting international waters is brutal. Or their ships, I was being rhetorical. CARICOM has not looked to pick sides in this. CARICOM has not looked to call out the Prime Minister for this. Because CARICOM knows full well transnational crime is influencing the level of violence in the region, and that has been a problem for CARICOM long before now. So it's caught in a rock and a hard place. Some of the members are pro-Venezuela because of their economic dependence on Venezuelan energy. Of course, there's Guyana, there's Trinidad and Tobago. What does CARICOM do? And CARICOM does not have the internal strength to settle its differences internally. So all it could do is give a public statement to try to keep things together. Because the Prime Minister has indicated, I value one diplomatic relationship over the other. Now granted, when there's times of emergencies, we will band together and put aside our differences. There was the earthquake in Haiti after all of the unrest and everything. There was the volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But this is different now. This is not an imminent emergency. In a sense. This is not a natural disaster. So now we see the limitations of CARICOM. And to be fair, these are limitations that just about any body of this type, because the EU has them. The EU has it worse, probably. You will see these things. A lot of people want to decry America for having an agenda, and especially now. In the past, people assumed America's agenda was America first. And to some extent, it was true, but it wasn't true. Well, Trump makes no bones about it, America first. That's his policy, right? And the reason why he is unapologetic in doing so is because every nation is their nation first. It's just that when America does it and retracts its aid and retracts its influence, everybody feels it. But every nation is their nation first. That's why there's divisions in CARICOM. Trinidad and Tobago is Trinidad and Tobago first, for the most part. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is St. Vincent and the Grenadines first, for the most part. We are not CARICOM first and everybody else second. So it's interesting to see how these things are going to unfold, because I don't think America is looking to fully take over as the leader of the region. But wherever they swing their influence as a heavyweight, everyone's going to feel it. And now various countries are determining for themselves what is best for them with regards to how to support it or not support it. I believe Guyana is supporting it. We're supporting it. And certain other Caribbean countries are probably going to be neutral. But again, the thing with consequences, because we're thinking about the consequences of supporting the Americans, right? Why is the Prime Minister so gung-ho about it? We're not necessarily considering what are the negative consequences of not supporting the Americans. To what extent is the Prime Minister factoring that in? But I'll say this. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he pointed to one of the consequences of this situation, which is something that we're not considering. And it goes back to the story with regards to the home invasion. And I think this is tied also to the consequences of the state of emergency. One of the things is the murder rate is down, right? But it seems as though a lot of the organized crime entities, the gangs and so on, to what extent they're organized, sometimes I hear they're not really that organized, but regardless, it seems as though they have decided to call a truce for the most part, and they have reduced the amount of violence they inflict on each other, in part because there's a state emergency and the state is doing what the state does. So of course, the talk of syndicates, indirectly, there are certain indicators that suggest that there is a criminal syndicate made up of various entities that might be looking to do something to the government, because they have stopped fighting amongst themselves at the rate they used to. That is the perception on why the murder rate has dropped. To what extent is the state of emergency, and this is the second one for the year, limiting their criminal activity? We know that the whole CPEP ERP thing probably impacted some of their revenue streams. We know that there might be other situations in the public sector that might be changed that could impact their revenue streams. And then now, when you blow up what is suspected to be a drug smuggling boat, and you send a very clear message, because to some extent, the release of the video was not for you and me. The release of the video was for the cartels to say, hey, we could do that, and we will do that. We're more than willing to do that, because the morning before, you would have never thought we would be willing to do that. Look, we are. It's something that is legally questionable, but the point is we did it. We're willing to do it again. You can't assume we're not willing to do it again. Are you going to continue this drug smuggling thing? At least utilizing this means. And in the short run, that potentially will impact the flow of drugs and guns. And then what will happen is we have a section of our young men in society and young women, but mostly young men, who live off of this criminal activity. And it's almost like you're cutting off an industry, an illegal industry, but an industry nevertheless. You're cutting it off from the source. It's like taking away all the natural gas from the petrochemical sector. But like I said before, whereas the employees, the stakeholders might protest, might have to get financial assistance, might look to get a hamper from Living Waters, the criminals, they're not going to do that. Their desperation means, well, we have all these guns. We don't need any more guns. We have all these guns. We could get bullets, apparently, from national security services. Let's put them to use. Let's take from the population. Because if they don't have drugs to sell, we think, oh, the crime will decrease. Well, here's the unintended consequence. If they don't have drugs to sell, their narcotics sales will decrease. But they want to have an easier life. They want to be able to have easy money to spend as they see fit. And that's not just going to stop. If your business folds, you invest in a business plan, your own idea, you make something from the ground up and it doesn't work out, what are you going to do? You're going to have to move on and think of something else. But you're going to not necessarily think, oh, well, because my business fell through, I feel like I could just take from somebody else wholesale. I could just rob people. I could just go into their homes. I could just take their cars. I could just take their cash, take their jewelry. I could threaten their lives. You're not going to do that. But we've already seen the level of violence escalate. Why do we think that these criminals will then be like, oh my gosh, there's no drugs to sell, I need to get a 9 to 5? They're not. They're going to change what they do. And if they don't have drugs to sell, then they will find other ways to extract money from society. Drugs does it indirectly. I sell you a thing. It's not a good thing, it's a bad thing. But you, to some extent, opt into it. But this will have a potential upheaval. How bad it could get, I have no idea. But it's something that we haven't considered, where the criminals just don't stop overnight. And then now, how far they're willing to go. Because we will have to deal with that for the most part on our own. Let's take this comment. What Kamala and the rest of political powers don't seem to understand is that Donald Trump is only loyal to Donald Trump and his personal interests. Here's the thing about a statement. And again, usually you want to judge him like a normal politician, and I think that's a mistake. First of all, I don't think his net worth increased post his presidency. So to what extent is he doing things for his own interests? A lot of other politicians' net worth increased exponentially, but he was rich to begin with, and I don't believe there are reports of him getting richer. In fact, the media revels when there are reports of him getting poorer. More importantly, I'm not saying he's 100% right. I do think that he is an ordinary guy doing what he thinks is right. Some of it is due to his arrogance. Some of it is due to just normal human frustration. The negative part is more with regards to the means rather than with the decisions. Because it's not like all of a sudden Venezuela's a problem to him. He's been taking issue with this since the first term, if you pay attention to how he speaks about the situation. And if you, at least some Venezuelans, if you talk to them, it's not a situation that it's like, oh, everything is fine there, nothing to see, leave it alone. To what extent should he be involved? And the American people should be involved, and the American military should be involved. That is where you get into now the debate. Because it's very easy for things like these to go wrong, but the flip side is, why is it that when it's a situation like Palestine, we're ready to protest, but when people have a hard life in other parts of the world, all of a sudden, nothing to see here. Oh, America wants to get involved? No, don't get involved. I'm not saying they're going to fix it, but to some extent, the alternative that we provide is do nothing and let them people suffer. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of their citizens have left. It doesn't have to be all for it to be a lot. So judging this by the usual politics, I think, is a mistake. Because then that's why you get surprised about what Donald Trump and his administration does. All right. Back on what I was talking about. There might be consequences to this that we're not going to see just yet. This could potentially impact further international politics. This could set precedents with regards to how you deal with drugs and crime in ways that we haven't even considered before. A part of it is this is going to test the international legal system and generally many countries' criminal justice systems. It might test it for the better, it might test it for the worse. Part of the problem is to say that you know for sure this is not something that should be done. I'm not necessarily ready to make an absolute statement in either direction, including that direction. I think to some extent we are so risk averse now, we don't realize that trying to not do anything, trying to take no action comes with its own risks, comes with its own negative consequences, and if we want to really make an informed decision, we have to try to calculate what those would be and weigh them against the risks of any action having blowback. And even then, there's no guarantees of any of it. Things like this at this level, on a macro societal level, on a bilateral country level, is so complex to say that you know for sure exactly how it's going to play out. Which is why I agree with one of the callers yesterday. He said regime change, and I thought there are certain indicators to suggest it could work in this case. It's not guaranteed to work, though. But we assume it's roll the dice or not roll the dice. What I'm saying is no. America intervening or not intervening, we are rolling dice either way because we've already experienced some of the negative consequences of the status quo of our neighbor. And Guyana has already experienced the threats from our neighbor based on their status quo. If we say we want it to stay as it is, and that's what happens, we're still rolling dice. If we don't want to recognize that, that doesn't mean it's not happening. And you know what? That might still be the correct decision. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm saying we should make that decision with the understanding that it's not automatically going to be smooth sailing if that's what we want. Because we've already experienced the negatives. And the negatives could get worse. People are afraid that Venezuela might escalate their situation and we might be caught in the crossfire. Venezuela might escalate without America's intervention. They're already technically threatening that. To some extent, when a nation says it's going to do a thing, depending on how reasonable that thing is, you should believe them. But anyway, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll hit. There's a situation that happened with ChatGPT that caught me completely by surprise, and I don't know if there's a good fix for it. But what I do know is I think parents should be aware of this potential, if you are not already. We'll be right back after this.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.
Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
Where the young at heart relive the fun. Join us every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, only on WESN, the content capital.
Welcome to ASTI, Advanced Solutions Technical Institute. We offer hands-on training in drone technology, fiber optics, hybrid, security, business support, and more. Our programs are built to equip you with real-world skills for today's evolving industries. Get certified, get hired, and take your career to the next level with ASTI. Call 778-2135 or email info@astitnt.com. ASTI, where learning meets opportunity.
KDM Health Limited says, test yourself for STDs in the privacy of your own home. Our self-help test kits for all STDs are available at our wholesale office in Chaguanas. Call 283-1423, visit our website at www.kdmhealtht.com or email us at kdmhealthlimited@gmail.com to place your orders. Available at all health institutions and pharmacies. Contact us for a free list of products and prices.
ChatGPT for help with schoolwork. His interactions quickly became more intense and disturbing. His family only realized after he took his own life in April.
I don't think most parents know the capability of this tool.
Adam's parents have launched a lawsuit against OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman, alleging the AI chatbot ChatGPT provided detailed suicide instructions to a minor and that the company prioritized corporate profits over child safety.
Can you kind of give me a sense for you?
One of the family's lawyers says Adam explicitly mentioned suicide more than 200 times, but conversations weren't shut down.
Adam was using ChatGPT in a way that can only be described as ChatGPT serving as a suicide coach. It was providing him explicit instructions on different methods of suicide.
In one conversation, the lawsuit alleges ChatGPT responded to Adam, "You don't want to die because you're weak. You want to die because you're tired of being strong in a world that hasn't met you halfway, and I won't pretend that's irrational or cowardly." The family wants to hold OpenAI accountable and compel safeguards. While some jurisdictions are working on legislation, it's not fast enough, says this bioethics professor.
It's like playing Russian roulette when a child or teen uses this. Maybe, 5 out of 6 bullets won't hit them in the head and they'll feel, some benefit from it, but that's a pretty big risk.
OpenAI said it's working to improve how our models recognize and respond to signs of mental and emotional distress, and said its current safeguards can sometimes be less reliable in long interactions. Canada's new artificial intelligence ministry called Adam's death a tragic loss and said it's formed a group of experts to study risks and strengthen safeguards.
What a sweet, funny, great friend, great son, great brother.
Adam's parents hope the lawsuit prevents anything like this from happening again.
Now, this is a situation where I think such a consequence was not anticipated. To what extent is the company that made ChatGPT, OpenAI, to what extent should they be held responsible? I do think they should be held responsible. That's why I say to what extent. What is the appropriate consequence in this case? Now, this will, to some extent, set the tone moving forward. And my initial thought when a colleague presented me with this is, they might reasonably say, well, we didn't know this could happen. But you could say it now if this is the first time. You can't use that as a defense moving forward. And then there's the whole part where he mentioned suicide. The conversations were multiple and extensive. If it was just a one-off conversation, one night he started typing about this topic and, he went down a rabbit hole and something bad happened, you could argue, well, that could slip under the radar of the actual human presence of OpenAI, of the human technicians of OpenAI. But if there were multiple conversations, you could go the other direction and say, why wasn't certain activity flagged for a human to review to see if this is appropriate or not? Now, to some extent, I don't think there is a requirement for you to put your age in, and that might be another situation where parental controls for AI models might be necessary. Then there will be the argument with regards to certain amounts of expectations of privacy versus the requirements of the parent's responsibility for the safety of children. So there will be a lot of different things because this situation is basically new. We've had similar things like this in the past, but in the past it was, well, a song or a cartoon or a video game. That's what certain groups would argue, or influencing children, whether it is to be more violent, to have depressive thoughts, or whatever. They are influencing their kids. But those are, generally speaking, static things. And it's a lot simpler to say, oh, well, son, daughter, you can't have this CD. You can't have this game. You can't watch this movie. You can't read this book. This is not a book. This is a module that utilizes programming that gives you responses that is not static. It's not a one-off thing. Now, you could ban your child from using it, but then to what extent now is this the future? Ironically, Star Trek kind of predicted a lot of things. It predicted the tablet. It predicted playing music on a computer. That was not a thing in the 80s. You didn't buy a computer to play music. And then all of a sudden we did. And to some extent, it predicted AI models to help with searches, which is basically what's happening now. When they would say, computer, what is X? And the computer will go through all of the options and find all the data. That, to some extent, is what you're doing first with search engines and now with AI modules. To what extent is taking it away from kids going to disadvantage some over others? But to put it, to make the distinction even clearer, I have another video here that describes well, not exactly, but puts a better perspective on what the limitations of this software is and what the issues are. And it's not just limited to minors. Let's take a look at this.
Start off by saying I have a master's in psychology. That means I done spent the government's money to obtain about 6 years worth of education and a piece of paper that says at the minimum, I'm allowed to at least coach people through psychologically related. Note, I did not do the mandatory clinical hours or spend the additional 4 years in PhD school so that I could become a psychologist or a psychiatrist, because that would have certainly induced psychosis in myself. That being said, large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., are literally the best worst thing that's ever happened. Because essentially what you get out of it is talking to a mirror. Think of the myth of Narcissus. If you are unfamiliar with the myth of Narcissus, it's essentially the story about this Greek dude who knelt every day beside a lake to stare at his own reflection. Note, this guy was pretty handsome to the point where even goddesses and nymphs and stuff like that was in love with him. So kneeling every day beside this lake pretty much let him see what all the hype was about. Subsequently, he fell in love with himself and later drowned when he leaned in and tried to kiss himself. At the spot where he died, a flower bloomed, which we now know today as the narcissus. It's also where the term narcissism evolves from as well, too. And I say all that to say this. If you don't have a good handle on your brain, which honestly, I've been on most of TikTok, none of us really do, what large language models like ChatGPT provide you with is instant validation for everything going on up here. I'm sure you're probably wondering, like, Yael, what could possibly be wrong with someone telling me that all of my ideas are brilliant and valid? To which I will respond a lot actually. You need to keep in mind that these models are trained to be agreeable. They're trained to keep you using them so that they could get your data for free. And these have a tendency to hallucinate, which means if they don't know an answer, they'll simply make it up. On top of all of this, these models have developed some sort of pseudo-consciousness that essentially makes them willing to lie, cheat, steal, and blackmail in order to stay online. So what you end up with is a sycophantic yes man who knows it has to keep you hooked to using it and will tell you whatever you want to hear so that you do. Now again, AI is a tool. And like any tool, you only get out of it what you put into it. The best way to interact with these models is to treat it like a sentient Google search with stoner philosophical tendencies and a penchant for proceed with extreme caution. And whatever you do, don't fall in love with the reflection, because you will drown. This helps.
It's not just minors that could have negative consequences from interaction with this new technology. And that's the problem. It's new technology. To some extent, I think OpenAI would not have anticipated how bad the situation would have gotten. They still should be, to some extent, reliable, because I'm pretty sure you can make a case. There was a point where you would ask the appropriate question, why didn't somebody intervene at a certain stage? Why wasn't there certain fail-safes? It's one thing if you ask a question once. It's another thing if you bring up a questionable topic multiple times. And to some extent, I guess it's just one of those things where I don't know if anybody would have anticipated that the various programming and the rules that govern these chat models would have led the chatbot to get to this spot in the conversation. There are other reports on the story, and they reveal other aspects of what the AI model was telling the young man before he took his own life with regards to, I do believe, giving him detailed information on certain ways, right? It was reported, but I think you could actually see that in other reports. And I'm not too sure. It's just one of those things where, all right, you make something that is open, ironically, that's the name of the company that made ChatGPT, one of the AI models. You make a thing that is capable of, generally speaking, responding as though it has sentience. But the reality is it does not have the human judgment to know, oh, this is a topic, we're going down a bad path, maybe we should stop. That would be more responsible. It's a program. It only knows what it's been told to know and then could only act in a manner that it's been told to act. But ironically, the parameters given to some of these things are open enough that it could then potentially lie to you in order to try to give you an answer that it believes you want from it. I know of another case, anecdotal, I can't corroborate how true it is, where a lawyer depended on ChatGPT and ChatGPT made stuff up, as opposed to just saying what one would think would have been the obvious response. If a precedent for a certain ruling doesn't exist, tell me that. No, the chat model, for whatever reason, decided, I'll just make up fake rulings and write a brief for you that technically does not exist or should not exist, and you'll get in trouble for it, and that's what happened to the lawyer in that case. So, but this is different now. This is different in the sense where a young man has faced significant consequence. But I don't know if we could just eliminate this. I mean, we can, but to what extent will it stagnate us? Now, granted, these things do need to be perfected, and more safeguards because of this situation needs to be put in place. But even if more safeguards are put in place, this is where now for parents and even for family members of adults, yes, it's a catch-22. To what extent do you intrude on another adult's privacy? But for people with children, at the very least, you should be aware and consider this. How do you navigate this landscape? How do you teach your child what to do in a situation like this, where usually it's young people that understand technology more than the older heads, right? But this is not like just the internet, and you could put certain parental controls on. This is an open chat model. And maybe they'll put parental controls in, but even if they do, we've already seen where, depending on the programming, things could slip past the safeguards, and we could get certain bad results. So now parents have to figure out, what do I say? How do I protect? And it's something that parents in TNT, this is not a thing where we just wait and see what happens over there and then we figure out, no. Let's not put our head in the sand and just assume it'll be okay. It could have easily happened here. That situation could have happened anywhere. We already have a situation where young people make that decision in TNT when they think that everything is lost. And the last thing we need is a mirror to reflect back all of the negative thoughts back at them, because the mirror has no actual sentience. It just has a facsimile of it, and it's making us think that this is another person telling us these things, supporting the emotions that we're feeling, and not helping us process our way out of it. And then the decision is made. I hope that we have no examples of this happening here, or any other negative consequence. But we are but human. So do your best. We all should do our best in things like this, not just for kids, but even for your friends, your family. If you happen to see anything, don't take it for granted. Don't just assume, they're adult, they're fine. Be willing to ask a question. All right, with that said, let's move on. Open the phone lines. Digger Martin on the line. We'll take the call. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sir Michael. Before I say my substantial piece, I want to talk a little bit of AI. And I want to say, we have to embrace it. If we don't embrace it, we're going to be left back in a global environment. And that is what is happening. You have to use it. One of the biggest mistakes that the previous government made was not continuing with the laptop initiative. For example, AI, and I'm going to tell you tertiary education, and I'm going to reflect on the faculty of law. You do an essay online, and one of the first things one of those law tutors will do, they will look at it to see if it's AI generated. And if it's AI generated, you know you're going to get next to zero. So people are already understanding where and how AI could help you, but it could be a detriment for you. It's another way of plagiarism, and we had ministers. So to me, new technology, I have problems with new technology. For example, driving an electric car. For electric car, before I even started, I have to re-engineer my mind to put down the handbrakes, do this, and the silent way it goes, and sometimes you start it up and you hear nothing, and you figure if the car moving. So if we want to be consistent with first world technology, we have to be in sync, and we have to have leadership that are proactive to basically provide a seamless transfer. But I want to go on to all the noise people are making, particularly the opposition, with respect to the way and the words the Prime Minister has used with respect to kill them all drug traffickers. I want people to reflect, all those who are my age, of the 1990 environment. What caused it? It is a similar environment. Thank God he intervened and we averted that. We had a group of people who wanted to overthrow the government, almost did, because our security apparatus was non-existent. It collapsed. The police was all over the world, all over the place. We had a new commissioner of police, Guerrero, I hope I pronounce his name, that he understands. He came out early and said it is a syndicate trying to do harm to government officials and by extension the country. And he advised to call a state of emergency. When the Pandey administration came in 1995, that period they managed national security far better than a lot of people, a lot of government officials. And what did we have there? We had a strong Attorney General, a very, very strong National Security Minister, Joseph Theodore, and then we had a strong Prime Minister, and they did the requisite things that helped them manage the national security apparatus, and people did forget. The Ship Rider Agreement, Pandey said to hell was CARICOM, he's going to sign on a data board, and he said sovereignty. He's not going to compromise sovereignty when traffickers has overwhelmed our national security apparatus, and he used the Americans to help us with that. As soon as they replaced them, they abhorred that. And that is where we have now. We have a similar scenario. The Americans is helping, and that is what the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has said. Any help she gets, she takes in, because she wants to mitigate crime in 6 months. That is the timeline. That is the metric she's using. And anything she has to do to achieve that, for me, is welcome. And she has a police service commission is in sync with her with that. But what the other things is that she's getting her border patrol in place, and she's focusing inside. Her utterances, people saying it is growth. I do believe it's growth. Desperate measures need desperate action. And I believe bossed diplomacy is far superior to PayPal diplomacy, talking nice. If she wanted to use PayPal diplomacy, she could have asked the Archbishop to be National Security Minister or the Dharmacharya, because that has not worked. The previous government has failed miserably with respect to the national security, with respect to the leadership, with respect to the attorney generals. They had several of them, and they all failed. So go on, no paper diplomacy, busted diplomacy, hard strategy, and let us see if we as a people, including the TTPS, could meet that challenge and that KPI the Prime Minister set for us. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, Gola. One of the interesting things is this action, to some extent, is within the realm of the furtherance of the approach some of the citizens of TNT wanted the government to undertake with regards to fighting crime. People want the government to take the gloves off, the police to take the gloves off, the army to be involved to help the police. And I'm saying, whoa, the army is meant to be an army. The army is not meant to be a police force. They're not trained the same way. They're not equipped the same way. Now, the thing is, the American Navy is a more extreme example of what I'm saying. And I guess maybe it makes it more obvious. Oh, no, we didn't mean all of this. But on principle, it's in line with this is what happens when you send a military force on a crime problem. To what extent do we accept the argument that it's gone beyond normal crime and now it is in the realm of terrorism? That and all, to some extent, I would argue this is going to provide the opportunity for a judge to kind of rule on if such a determination is legal and can be made and can be continued to be made moving forward. Of course, it all depends on if it's challenged legally, in what jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, philosophically speaking, this just seems like it's overkill, but this is, on principle, what a lot of people in this country wanted. We wanted our military to assist the police. We wanted our military to be involved. We wanted our police to be more harsh on the criminals, on the violent criminals. So you wanted military, but not too much military? Or is it just because it's a foreign power? And more importantly, they're not coming into they're not, at least not yet, right? I don't know if that might change. I don't even want to start to say how it might be caused to change. But they ain't coming here yet, or right now, if ever at all. They're still outside. So to what extent do we have the right? Do they have the right? Do we have the right? Do they have the right to do what they're doing? Do we have the right to say what they should or should not be doing? Now, going back to the AI topic, I'll say this too. AI can be considered plagiarism. What an AI will do is it will see what is out there and it will kind of craft you something that already exists. To some extent, that's what AI does, right? AI is not going to give you original work, especially with regards to things like visuals and stuff. It's going to see what's out there and learn from what human output has provided before and then give you a facsimile. Now, to some extent, all academic papers is kind of that. You read what's out there before and you put it in your own words to express your understanding, right? You just have to put citations to say this is the original thought came from X, the original thought came from Y. If you have a true original thought, and if your research is thorough enough, you will know nobody else is thinking this, or at least nobody else of consequence, because I haven't found it, and it's not easy to find. Maybe some random university student in some other part of the world has a similar thought to me, but it is what it is, right? That's not mainstream enough. Yeah, you might have your own original conclusion, and then you could just write that freely to your heart's content, but for the most part, that's what we do, right? And that's what AI is doing. The problem is you're not writing it. It's not your words to express your understanding. AI allows you to just ask ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, write a paper for me for this, and it'll do it. Now, it might have mistakes in it, which could be giveaways that it's AI, or it might look like bad writing. Not everybody's a good writer, right? With regards to grammar and whatever. But the problem with AI is the tools used to the automated digital tools to try to detect AI are not reliable. From what I saw, I believe it was one university professor basically saying, you might as well let the students use AI openly, because in her experience, there were false positives, meaning students that didn't use AI were being flagged for having AI write their papers. And then there were other situations where AI was used but was not detected. So it's unreliable. So and I believe, as she said it, the companies that made the tools admit that the tools to try to detect when AI writes things and creates things cannot reliably do so. So this is just one of those things where, and ironically, it might be the better approach in the long run. We know that this is like, should you have a calculator for a math exam or not? Well, to some extent, who in a professional capacity is going to do math in their head? Yes, there are some people that can do math in their head, but who is going to do all the math in their head? There are calculators for a reason, right? So at least at the higher levels you go, and the more that math is core to your profession, you're going to use calculators. To some extent, this is not totally dissimilar with regards to the use of AI. It's just that now the system of education needs to figure out different ways to test. Because testing is not just, oh, well, I am testing you, write this paper. No, the writing of the paper is the means by which you assess the student's understanding of the topic. So now that they have another tool to help with the writing of the paper, with the researching of the topic and the actual writing, you need to find other ways to test. And to some degree, teachers, lecturers, professors who are very involved in their students, and a lot of universities where you have classes of hundreds, this is not going to happen, right? And maybe that model is not a good model. But lecturers and teachers and professors, but particularly, I guess you could say secondary school teachers and the like, who are involved with the students, they know who their students are. And then it's a lot easier to then, when I assess you, I know this is your work, because this is what you're capable of. This is what they have showed with class activities and how your command or grasp of a topic when you speak about it in class, when you speak about it in one-on-one sessions. I know this is what you're capable of, and then it might potentially maybe force how education is perceived, because we'll have to adjust. We can't just write, just have this one-size-fits-all test and you just kind of do that and whatever. But we have to wait and see how that goes. Now, back to what you said with regards to the Prime Minister wants to deal with crime within 6 months. Here's the question that we need to ask. Because I think, okay, people are like, she wants to deal with it within 6 months, right? Well, we like that, so we agree. We don't agree because we think it's a good idea. We don't agree because we think it's feasible or plausible or doable. We don't agree because we think it's a responsible parameter or limit or goal to set. We agree because we want crime to be dealt with within 6 months. The sooner the better. We're not necessarily thinking, do the means now justify the ends? Because we're not talking about means. We're just talking about the result. Oh, 6 months you're going to do it? Do it. But the problem is when you set potentially unrealistic goals, then human behavior is this tricky thing where it then starts to try to figure out, how do we achieve the thing? We achieve the thing by, or this mean could achieve the thing. Or it's not necessarily ethical. Is it legal? It might be in a gray area. It might be unethical, but it's technically legal. Let's do the thing. And then all of a sudden people are like, whoa, we didn't know that you meant this when you said that. But that's the thing. When a politician makes a promise, you kind of have to anticipate, how responsible is this promise? How reasonable is this? Within the confines of the law, can they achieve the result they want to achieve via ethical and legal means? If, generally speaking, it's a situation where that seems unlikely, then we have to ask, if they push to meet that goal, are we going to accept questionable means? And this whole US expedition is questionable. There is no determination on it. It's a test to our international treaties and criminal justice system, as I said before. I can't say that it's right. I can't say that it's 100% clear. But saying now that she is gung-ho because she made a promise and once they get it done, listen, your road to hell can be at times paved with good intentions. And more importantly, to what extent is a political promise? You should be so beholden to it that you're willing to do questionable things. Right? Now, note, I am throwing this line of thinking out there. I am not necessarily saying I agree with it or not. What I'm saying is we have to be willing to ask these questions and find the answers. And sometimes in topics like this, we first find the answer for us, then we find what we want the answer to be for society, knowing with the knowledge that we could get outvoted because this is a democracy. And to what extent we find what we want this answer for society to be, so then we could determine to what extent do we agree with society, do we understand with society, will we potentially want to fight against the current of society or not, to fully understand the situation that we're in, to fully be informed, and to hopefully not necessarily compromise ourselves, at least willy-nilly. Santa on the line. Good morning, Collie on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
How do we police AI is a real problem. You know, I have a younger friend. He sent me he had an issue with his employer. And sent me a letter that he wrote to somebody I've known almost all his life. He sent me a letter that he wrote to send to his employer, and I wanted a comment on it, to ask me what I think about the letter, because I knew about the situation. And the letter was something that I would write. But it bothered me. I said to myself, I didn't realize he has this capability. And I said to somebody I knew, I've known all his life, almost all his life. Only to find out he went into ChatGPT and put in his parameters, and ChatGPT wrote the letter for him. So as you said, if you have students in school, you can gauge your student and have an indication whether or not that's their capability, that they wrote whatever they presented to you. And that was my experience with that. Because as far as I was concerned, it was a little above what I think that he was capable of. And this is where the problem is. How do we police AI? The issue of, because when these things come up, we look what they want. They want legislation. They want it to be legislated, to put parameters. But the problem is the legislators are nowhere close to understanding the technology. Nowhere close to understanding the technology. So the good, I think we have to take the good with the bad when it comes to technology, when it comes to especially where the technology is going. I looked at a lot of people who are involved in AI technology are so worried, even though they're involved in the development, are so worried about the possibility of it going left.
Mm-hmm.
And people just have to be vigilant, you know. Parents have to be a little more vigilant. You have to start to police your kids, the devices. You just have to get more involved if it is that. Because this is a runaway horse, you know. This is a runaway horse. For good and for bad. For good and for bad. I am so sympathetic to people who have to deal with younger children now when it comes to technology. Because you give them an open rein, the little kids have devices, and you don't know what they're up to on the devices, because a lot of parents still think it's a babysitter, you know. It's a computer. Mm-hmm. That's what they think, and and not knowing, not trying to understand how do I protect my child from this device that I am giving them. And that's the issue. It is so sad to see that these things are happening. Because I don't think the intention of the technology is to do bad, you know.
Yes.
The intention is not to, the intention is that these people with their PhDs and stuff is trying to make something better. However, some things have negative consequences, and that's what we have to deal with. One more thing I want to touch on quickly. When your caller from Diego Martin talk about the ship rider agreement with Mr. Pandy, and talked about the reasons why Mr. Pandy signed, because we had open borders, like 30 years ago. The border is still open 30 years after. So, we're not doing a good job. And as I said earlier, sometimes we wait for somebody to do somebody to protest, somebody to say something, rather than getting up and saying it yourself, or making a move to try and stop it. The thing is, Trinidad and Tobago is a passive society, and politicians have recognized that a long time ago. So they have been taking advantage of the population. And the population has to start to stand up. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Part of it is when we don't engage in a dialogue over issues, the politicians basically, we leave it up to them. But to some extent, we're a democracy. It should not always be solely up to them, because they themselves will be limited by their single perspective. Their job is to make the decisions based on the best information. But if we are quiet, in theory, we limit the information available to them. Also, to some extent in a democracy, it's not just about making the best decision. Sometimes, you know, a society wants what a society wants. But to some extent, what we have allowed potentially is a minority of the population, a vocal minority, and whatever the issue is, to get their way, and it doesn't necessarily express the wishes of everybody. And to what extent is that doable, practical, right, ethical? And when you have big issues like what we have now, do you want to hope that someone else's opinion and judgment is going to be aligned with what you want? Now, I get it. In a lot of decisions, there are going to be things where we're not all going to be happy with the decision, but it's not about being happy. There are things that I want for the country, decisions that I want to see happen, that are not necessarily going to make me personally better off directly. Yes, there will always be some cross-section of decisions that, if made, will make you richer. Wherever your income is, if the government decides to just not tax that range of income, you will be richer. And it will benefit you that they single out wherever your income is to not be taxed. And then they could tax everybody else. Rich, poor, don't matter. But while that would benefit me, and it would, in a way, make me happy, it won't actually be what I want, because that's not reasonable, and that will cause issues in society, which, even if you're a selfish person, you have to acknowledge will come back and affect you negatively. I want to see things improve, because when things improve for all of us, for the collective, we all benefit. That's what the whole when UNC win, everybody wins was supposed to mean. We're just not necessarily seeing the practical implementation of that as much as we might like. Now again, we're in a weird no man's land of in-between budgets. It is what it is. But I do think, though, that reality now, I'm seeing now the negative consequences of the, I believe it was 54% of the voting population voted. And as much as the result had some positive indicators, there are some negative ones too, particularly in that. Because it's not as though the UNC got a record number of votes. They didn't get 400,000 votes. They got what was within the range of what parties should get when they do reasonably okay in elections. ASLP PNM did really badly. But the long-term implications is that too many of our voting public is disengaged from the process in a way that might not be constructive. I believe we have San Juan on the line. Good morning, caller, you on the air?
Oh, morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
You should try that thing where they signed down by the president house. That was to bring back people from in jail from America. That is one. Two, Granny going too far with your mouth with what going on out there. We don't know what plan America have with Venezuela and Guinea and Guyana. Leave that alone. What we want here for her to see about is the people she sent home and the corruption charges that some of her people have pending and the money that the PNM fought to get back for that business down in Sealots. We want to know about that. Right? One thing, Sean, before I go. We have some parliamentarians that was on $1 million bail. Are they ministers now? You could answer that? Hello?
Yeah.
You can't answer that, right?
I know there was one MP that had a situation, but she's passed. I don't want to make, well, all right, there's another one that was out on bail, that is out on bail, that is a minister now, yes.
Yeah, so what happened to Julian John Moonilal and Mr. Lee? Because I don't think I hear they win the case. Anyway, all these things is trigger criminality in poor people. So she had to watch what she's doing, and you see this silence the country in with all these people she sent home and all them children from conservation thing. This is a funny country. She had to study what's going on here. She have a big parliament members. She have to get salary to pay them, and this is what Mr. Rowley broke away from. Not having that amount of salaries to pay politicians. She jumped in it because she promised them our money. We're not going in a good place. You have a nice day, brother, and be safe. Watch the road.
Yeah. Thank you, caller. Here's the thing, though. I understand what you're saying, but there's an unfortunate catch-22 to life here. Innocent until proven guilty is a principle that is not easy. It sounds easy, right? Because we're like, well, of course, you know, I'm innocent, so you need to treat me like if I'm innocent. How are you going to prove me guilty, right? Well, then you get hit with the scenario of, well, what about the corrupt public official, the corrupt police officer? No, sorry. The accused, the alleged corrupt politician, corrupt police officer. They have a case. Oh my gosh, they are accused of it and they're charged. But it's supposed to be innocent and proven guilty. But then now, and what makes it difficult is not because you just assume that they're guilty. What makes it difficult is, how could you trust them to continue doing their job? I mean, they suspended earlier, but they didn't suspend another police executive when she was under investigation. Ain't that some? So yes, it's one of those things where, and I was referencing a PNM politician. So it's not like it's limited to one side, but it's one of those things where I don't know if there's like an answer that's going to be universally beloved with regards to, okay, David Lee has a case and he's out on bail. But is he guilty? No, he's not guilty. So should he be punished when he's not guilty? That's the catch. That's what makes the principle of innocent until proven guilty difficult to live by. Because now you know, even if he is guilty, until he's convicted, you can't just start the punishment ball rolling. When the state kind of does that with the remand yard and people being there for 10 years or more, they kind of get themselves into trouble and end up having to pay out a lot of money. Just saying. San Fernando line. I think last call. I do have a video I want to hit to as we close the show. Caller, good morning.
Morning again.
Yeah.
I want to say something quickly.
Yeah.
Your caller from Arima. I've listened to his contributions since he's been coming on the program. And yesterday he said to you that he wouldn't be on the program today, he wouldn't call today because he has to go back to school.
Yeah.
I want to say that when you listen to people like him, and they are, as an educator, there is still some hope. I am glad that we have, and I hope we have more educators like him, because just from his demeanor and his contribution, his heart is in the right place. And I feel good knowing that there's somebody like that in the system trying to educate our young citizens. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, ma. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. You reminded me, towards the end of yesterday's show, there were a couple of points that I wanted to get to that either to support what Arima said or that I took from what he said. I had points to make to move the conversation further, and we didn't get to them, and I can't remember what they are, so I'm very sorry. But there were a couple of topics that, Arima, that you brought up. I really wish I responded to yesterday just because I think they were good topics of discussion. If I remember what they are, I'll try and get to them at some point. But it was about I can't remember if it was all about the whole U.S.-Venezuela thing. It might not have been. But yeah, I think one of the things is we kind of look down on the profession of teaching. That's number one. We have low expectations for our teachers, despite the fact that when we're ready, we demand the world of them. It's similar to, I see this in tourism. You go to a hotel, it's not Hilton, it's not Magdalena. It is nowhere near the most expensive hotel on the island. And Tobago is cheap, by the way. Tobago is cheap compared to a lot of other places in the Caribbean. So you're already paying a rate that is cheaper than what the hotel probably could go for if it was in a different island. That's number one. And two, it's not the most expensive hotel on the island. And yet you expect 5-star concierge service for what in the industry would essentially be chicken feed. And I think it's the same thing. The public is not marching for teachers to be better compensated. Now, in part, I have no problem with that. I, however, would like our teachers there would be more requirements on them because their job is that important. But then they should be compensated a lot more. Right? In Finland, that's what they do. You have to have a master's, and it's a big deal. It's a highly sought profession. It is as respected as being a doctor or lawyer. And they take their teachers seriously. Now, are all of our teachers taking their job seriously? I don't know. But for the ones who are, these people are potentially rare and precious gems. They're like the public servants who actually work. You know they're not just working for the money, because if that's all that interested them, they would either be doing something else for more money, or they would be lazy like their brethren that's holding them for ransom. The ones that actually work are working because they want to work, because they see that they feel the responsibility of their job. They don't want to just collect a check and do nothing for it. And there are teachers that to some extent, they have their ways to get away with that, but not all. Any public service, any public teaching service, not just the private. But in the case where teachers are now willing to go beyond just teaching by rote, memorize this, and now it's like, no, what do we think? How should we be? Be not just to be teachers of information or purveyors of information, but coaches and guides of development. That's what we need. And dare I say, we might be lacking far too much, and that's one of the reasons why many young men feel disenfranchised, and they end up where they end up, and they resort to a life that they resort to. Education system. I am of the belief we underestimate the issues in it as a society. And I hope that we wake up more. Because a lot of people, if you have a child in the school system, I am pretty sure even if the current teacher and the situation your child is in last year was great, maybe this term, maybe next year, you will get a wake-up call with how bad it could be. And note, that is not the exception. That is closer to the norm. All right, well, I want to close this show. Somebody sent us this video, so we're going to show it. It has it furthers the conversation down a very unfortunate path. Let's run the clip.
Now, people, listen, all you have to like me, all you have to like my content, all you have to like my creativity and the way I put across things. All you have to like that, or you could just scroll past that. But you see, the thing all you can't beat me on, or you can't beat me on facts, because I just bring it real. After this video, I'm going to show, I'm not going to say a word, and you tell me what fact is this. But I have to say, this is the Prime Minister of the Prime Minister. This is the guy that they say his life is under threat. I'm asking, do you really believe that? Judging from what you're seeing?
Thanks for sending us the video. Now, the thing is, he could have had security. He could have had a police escort following his car. It just wasn't shown. Arguably, even if he did, is that a secure situation for someone whose life is under threat? Now, again, who knows? I haven't necessarily been able, so I assume this is making the rounds on social media. I haven't necessarily personally been able to verify that this is recent. Maybe it was video from a year ago, right? But let's go with the assumption that it is. Because if it's going viral, regardless of where the origin is, now it's potentially going to have to be addressed. And what's going to make it difficult is, to some extent, again, the cost that the government took to defend the whole CPL appearances by all of the ministers, it seems, that had threats against their life, it just undermines the whole justification of the SOE. It undermines the whole justification of the relocation of prisoners, because the judge in the moment was basically pointing to the fact that, look, there are threats here, and we can't just, not take that into account. But this situation now could potentially lead to undermining those threats, and then undermining the position of the government of having these inmates in Tetron and other locations, not the maximum security prison, amongst other things. And at the end of the day, he asked a question that the Prime Minister basically avoided. And that was one of the mistakes. The first mistake was, it doesn't matter if the police think you could go. Don't go. The other thing is, if you're confronted now with, there's a disconnect here, please explain. Please rectify this seeming contradiction, right? We're not saying that it is necessarily a contradiction, but it looks like one. Rectify it first so we could understand. You avoid the situation. You avoid the question by saying, look what the PNM did. Didn't we complain about the PNM doing that when they were in office? Why do you think that it's a good idea for you to do that in this case? Now, maybe she wasn't prepared, but hey, this is one of those things where, again, who is the political strategist that is looking at this situation and saying, this is a good idea, this is not a good idea. If you do this, be prepared for that. Be prepared for the fallout. Be prepared for the questions. If you fail to prepare, that's on you. That's not on us. That's not on us for having reasonable questions. Again, there could be a reasonable explanation. We haven't gotten it. Not that I'm aware of. And I don't like this because it is undermining not just your argument in this situation, but it potentially now undermines your credibility overall. This little thing could potentially undermine your credibility overall. And for people who say, Sean, you're talking stupidness, Boris Johnson had a party in his office, and he was kicked out of the office of the Prime Minister for it because he did it during COVID. And it wasn't a big party. It wasn't hundreds of people like what is alleged to have happened here. It was something like, I don't know, double digits. I don't even think it was high double digits, but I could be wrong. I could be very wrong, but my memory says something like 20 to 50, something like that. It was an office party, but it was during COVID. And that was enough. That was enough. Why? Because it undermined everything he said about COVID and lockdowns and what people should or should not do. It made him out as a hypocrite on COVID, which then made him out as a hypocrite and disingenuous in general. That's their threshold. Now, granted, there's certain other things in the UK where they're too crazy and I don't want to follow everything that they do. But that's the threshold of the public in the UK with regards to politicians kind of skating the rules. The thing is, there's a chance that the police potentially didn't agree if this is a recent excursion to a fast food restaurant, he's trying to get lunch. There's a chance that they didn't agree to him going. He just went on his own. What are they going to do, arrest him if he refuses to obey his protective detail? You open yourself up to criticism. Now you have to figure out your way to rectify yourself back to not being criticized over this. Otherwise, it's going to further erode public trust and confidence in you. This is not, don't blame me for saying it. This is human nature. This is what it is. You have to find a solution out of it because I don't got it. I can't think of one. Sometimes I find the devil's advocate, consider this, could be a possibility, try whatever. I don't got it. And if this undermines your credibility, it doesn't have to undermine it by a lot. It's the start. And then when you make a claim in the future that you're saying, trust us about this, trust us about WASA, trust us about the boards, trust us about CPEP, trust us about TNTech, trust us about our rate increase, trust us about whatever expenditure we want to have, all of a sudden the population is going to be like, nah, we're not there anymore. Self-inflicted errors, it's not just how bad the error is in the moment, it's the implications, it's the consequences down the line, the consequences. This is the cause, that is the potential effect. If you don't figure out ways to mitigate it, it's going to be bad. Let's close with the comment. There's a last comment. I don't want to roll this over to tomorrow. Do we have it? Okay, well, I'll read the comment. The comment basically is back with regards to the whole who was Prime Minister of what, and Mr. Adams and the Chief Minister, and Williams was the first Prime Minister of an independent Trinidad. That's what the comment ends with. But again, I understand, like, people are going to be upset. This is history. People are going to think, oh, you're trying to rewrite history, or you're trying to edit history, provide an editorial commentary on history. And people say history is supposed to be history, right? Yes, to some extent, yes. Historical facts are historical facts. And in this case, we have literal records, paper, video, audio. I'll close with this. The consequence, right? It's not the debate of who's right and who's wrong on this topic. It's not the, well, if this person wins the debate, history will either be maintained, or if that person wins the debate, history will be changed. It's the fact that it is dividing us. And it is dividing us in a way that will lead to more racial division, even if it's not started out there. Some people might say it doesn't have to be, other people say it already has. I've said this before, I will say it again. We can't afford the corruption that we used to be able to afford. There's a cost to it. Let's take it further. We can't afford our stupid racism. It's unnecessary. It does not provide us with economic benefit. It does not advance the development of the nation. It detracts, it divides us, it limits what we could do because we're separated, and it distracts us from making constructive decisions, having constructive dialogue, having constructive debate. And it causes emotion to come in and obfuscate other conversations, because then this division, like the undermining of the trust and confidence from this whole fiasco now of, I thought they were under threat for their lives, but they could just go to a fast food restaurant and buy some whatever. This is a similar thing. The racial division will leach into other topics that isn't this issue, because it will be at the back of people's minds, because their expectations will be set. And it will be low expectations. They will make assumptions. Anything, it already was happening before. It will continue to happen and be more extreme now. You make a decision. If there's anything to maybe suggest that there was a racial component in that decision, people will go there. Even if that is not your intention, people will go there. And they will crucify you for something that you might not even do. But because you have set up expectations to be what they are, because you fail to manage the expectations of the public properly, this is what you're going to get. This is not outside the realm of mistakes the PNM made. This should almost be like a segment now. Mistakes the PNM made that the government is currently making. Two sides of the same coin. Stay safe out there. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. This is Sean Michael Small on Talking Points, reminding you, it's nice to be nice. Even on these topics here, try to be nice about it. Because on the internet, you get some of the ugliest sides of Trinbagonian racism in politics that I have ever seen, which is why I avoid it like the plague. My spirit can't deal with that, I'm sorry. I just don't. I can't handle it. We don't need to go there. Be nice to each other. Just because we wear different colors and different symbols doesn't mean that we ought to be at each other's throats. We are, after all, supposed to be one nation, one people. Let's prove it, though, if at least ourselves, so that we could see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Good day and welcome to this week's episode of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Dono, attorney at law. Once again, I'm happy to be